and welcome to our discussion. Our discussion will be around cybersecurity and the next normal. I'm Nathalie Marcotte. I'm President of Process Automation for Schneider Electric. In the last couple of months, there's been huge amount of changes, and these changes had to happen really fast in order to protect our people's safety as well as to ensure our business continuity. So if not careful, though, these changes can represent new cyber threat. So I don't know about you personally. Over the last couple of months myself, I've seen an increase in number of phishing emails I've received. And then I was actually reading recently a study indicating that indeed there's been an increase, quite a big increase in the order of malicious activity in the order of 3 times between January and March. So we all have to be careful as we adapt these changes because people are still active with bad intention. So today we're going to present a practical perspective and share some ideas around cybersecurity for you to consider when you're making these business decisions. Because at the end of the day, these decisions are there to protect your people, your operations, as well as your customers. The good news, though, is that lessons from previous crises, combined with solid cyber knowledge, can be really applied to ensure proper steps are followed moving forward. These steps could also include knowing what solutions to implement and what partners to properly adapt to this new way of working. You may know, but Schneider Electric is a global manufacturing company, and we produce, deliver, and service a variety of offers that are used around the world. We also had to adapt to this new business reality. But for more than a decade, we've also been working with our customers to help them improve their operation cybersecurity postures. We have had to work with them to assess and identify the issue, risk, and opportunities that they were facing at the time, and we work closely with them to design and implement solutions. These solutions they needed at the time for immediate challenge are also helpful to prepare them for the next normal. So that's part of the good news in all this madness we're in at the moment. Today I'm joined with Abdallah, our Vice President of Cybersecurity Services and Solutions. Together we will discuss cybersecurity challenge and concerns our customers are facing while they're navigated in the next normal. Jay will be sharing insights and examples of how different businesses are learning and adapting to this new environment, as well as what lessons and best practices they can apply to help overcome whatever will come next. So hello, Jay. How are you?
Hi, Natalie. I'm doing well, thanks. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
So our customers are operating businesses which were deemed essential. So they had been forced to react to new ways of working very quickly at a time when they had limited on-site personnel. They are also expected to perform at peak efficiency in some cases in such a way that there's no interruption to the critical service and goods they provide. So how are these companies adapting to this new environment, Jay?
That's a good question, and you're absolutely right. For many of our customers, continuous operation is absolutely critical. There's really no room for error here. And even though they're always looking for operational efficiencies, we have to always make sure that we're considering what types of changes we're making and how, of course, they're impacting the operation just because of these new environments. Now, our customers, of course, have to depend on many new technologies to create a secure environment so that they can continue to operate in the way that's demanded. And it's not just implementing or adhering to new policies and procedures with regards to COVID-19. It's also all about training personnel on the criticality of following these regulations too.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jay. We can never overlook the people aspect of any business continuity plan. So despite the high levels of automation in their plans, local or remote, people are still involved to ensure operations run continuously, safely, and securely. With all the various restrictions, though, on the number of people on premise, facilities operating on skeleton crews, how are these companies really managing?
Well, many different companies are going to require different solutions. So it's not just necessarily in some cases a specific solution for, a turnkey solution for all different types of entities. The reality is some may be looking for software-based solutions just to connect remotely to an HMI, while others are looking for hardware-based end-to-end encryption solutions for critical systems. So, of course, many of these organizations are going to need to manage remote access to their platforms. So Schneider Electric provides a solution to our customers that enables them to use their own specialized personnel to remotely access the operational technology assets and the applications in a very secure and safe manner. They can monitor these assets remotely, and then, of course, subject to an added level of authorization, they can then permit them to carry out specific maintenance tasks as well. It's very important to recognize that this functionality can also be extended to third-party experts as well, because as you know, in many cases, we need our vendors, we need our third-party providers to provide us with additional levels of support in many cases. So because of these COVID-19 restrictions, of course, there's always going to be a need for solutions that don't necessarily require or can't, for example, depend on procuring and shipping of hardware. So because of that, we're not just limited to, in many cases, only the remote connection to ICS components. So for example, some of our customers are already implementing secure remote access solutions, not only for ongoing operations and maintenance purposes, but also even to complete your traditional tasks like factory and site acceptance testing and commissioning activities. So as of course we've all seen, unfortunately, there's many bad actors that are looking to take advantage of the situation and to infiltrate key systems, acquire data, and even in many cases threaten the operational integrity. But with the right controls in place, our customers can indeed mitigate some of these business risks.
Okay, Jay, tell us a little bit more about this software-based secure remote access solution that customer can implement.
Yeah, so the software-based solution is really unique because it takes into consideration the fact that we really don't have the luxury of procuring hardware, configuring hardware at central facilities, of course, logistics and shipping, etc. So it's completely software-based, which can be using a virtual infrastructure that the customer may already have at their site, or a bare bones system that can be repurposed for hosting of virtual applications. So once we have the virtual infrastructure, of course, up and running, this would be a fully documented process that would be supported remotely by Schneider Electric cybersecurity services engineers, as well as, of course, the documentation itself that would be provided to the customer so we can support them remotely. But with that being said, once the virtual infrastructure is up in place, and of course, you create that first initial connection using the internet, the very first landing zone would be a publicly facing landing zone at the customer's site, meaning it would be, in cyber terms, it would be an insecure zone. Now, that zone may very well have network and host-based security controls, as well as having additional intrusion-based controls too. But because of the fact that it has exposure to the outside world, it's still considered a non-trusted or an insecure initial landing zone. Now, the interesting element here, of course, is the fact that there's no operational technology access from that point. As a matter of fact, from that first landing zone, what would happen is a secondary connection would have to be created. And of course, that secondary connection would be very specifically controlled with security policies from source to destination, specific ports and protocols as well. And then, of course, that secondary zone would be through a demilitarized zone, which would then allow you to begin authorizing specific users with specific role-based access controls to access operational technology assets. So there's actually 3 different levels of security that's built in, initially at a landing zone, secondarily through a DMZ, and then the tertiary solution, of course, would be to allow, through previously defined policies, the access into the operational elements. So it's definitely very robust, and what we love about it is the fact that it is indeed fully software based, so it can take advantage of existing infrastructures, or of course a virtual infrastructure that can be repurposed specifically for the access of remote solutions to be implemented at their sites.
secure remote access is one example of mitigating controls that can be implemented, but there are many more. So can you tell me which one would you be recommending, Jay, or do you recommend to your customers?
Sure, that's a fantastic question, Nathalie, and it's probably the question that gets posed to us the most is, what do you recommend in terms of basic security controls, or at least the first essential ingredients of creating a security management, a technology security management system? And what we do indeed recommend is to follow what we call the 5 essentials. So this is really where we're starting to look for compliance criteria to security assurance level 1 in the ISO 99 IEC 62443 standard. So we already talked about secure remote access, and secure remote access actually falls into that same set of 5 essentials because it meets the network segmentation component. So we always want to make sure that we segment networks from one another, whether that be specific vendors that are isolated virtually into one network segment, or specific pieces of hardware that are grouped together to control a specific function, or different even business units within the plants or within the sites that our customers are operating within. Network segmentation is absolutely key, and of course, remote access falls into that. The next element that we recommend is a central authentication mechanism. So again, tying into what you would take advantage of in this secure remote access solution, you want to make sure that role-based access controls are implemented. So we want to make sure, of course, that everybody has their own unique username. Everybody has a complex password. That complex password is changed on a regular basis as per the security policies of the organization. But the roles that are associated with those users are specific to their specific job code, their specific job regulations, basically. So if, for example, a maintenance engineer would need to log on to that central authentication mechanism, then only those tools and software and access controls become available to him or her once authenticating through that central authentication system. And of course, this gives you full auditing capabilities as well if you need to go back and audit the system at a later stage. So that's the second control. The third control is centralized endpoint protection. So of course, we want to make sure here that we have not only the basics of antivirus and anti-malware, but you also want to make sure that you have additional levels of endpoint protection, such as host intrusion, network intrusion prevention, data loss prevention, all implemented to make sure that we're using multiple layers. We call it the defense in depth approach within endpoint protection, multiple layers of host-based endpoint protection included. The fourth is centralized patch management. So it doesn't even have to be a completely automated or completely centralized solution, but as long as we have policies and procedures in place to make sure that patches are being managed in some capacity. So if, for example, there's a new vendor patch that gets released, whether that be through your operating system or through the tools and software that you use, we want to make sure that in a regular and consistent manner, patches are indeed being applied to the systems that are running these critical assets. So that's the fourth element. And the final element is kind of surprising to some people because they don't necessarily consider it as a security control, but it's actually backup and disaster recovery. So you want to make sure, for example, if we run into a situation where we have a ransomware attack, this is really where backup and disaster recovery comes into play, because we want to make sure that we have recent backups. We want to make sure that those backups are tested on a regular basis. And the reality is with high degrees of encryption and some of these very advanced ransomware attacks, you want to make sure that you're not paying the ransom. And of course, you want to make sure that you have access to your data to continue the operation. So without a doubt, backup and disaster recovery becomes that fifth and most important element. So just a quick review of the 5 elements is network segmentation, central authentication, authorization, and accounting system. You've got endpoint protection, you've got patch management, and then of course you've got disaster recovery and backup systems to be in place.
That is indeed an excellent point. So it's clearly that new technology is helping industry up and running, to keep them up and running in the age of COVID. But when you looked at it, though, business leaders are already looking ahead. Industrial operations are going to look quite different from now on. We're already having a lot of reflection on what's the future look like. There will be, reduction in workspaces at many customer sites, and the people realize it's feasible right now. So there's a lot of discussion around it. It's likely that larger facility will continue to operate at reduced headcount for the long term. In addition, most companies faced a huge uncertainty around their financial viability. They had to balance the cost of short-term changes with the long-term business risk. Short-term, they've implemented new technology and approach, not really formalizing process yet, though. So how do they ensure that those changes become part of their new long-term operating playbook?
Yeah, it's clear, Nathalie, that working from remote locations will actually be either a full-time or certainly a much more integrated part of the new norm. So for our working lives, of course, for me, just my own example, I'm used to being on the road quite regularly. And of course, what I have found is that there are ways indeed to be very productive in a completely remote fashion. And of course, our team members are experiencing the same thing. So this is definitely a cultural change for many people. But with that being said, we need to really put greater focus on establishing strong cybersecurity foundation that focuses on people, process, and technology. So it's all about working harder to develop comprehensive and ongoing cybersecurity culture that involves every level of the organization, especially including the support from executive leadership. So for example, before instituting new work from home policies, companies really need to make sure that their infrastructure and their assets are in place to remain safe and secure. So for example, if we're taking into consideration a new secure remote access infrastructure, we can't just forget about the fact that we still have assets to run, the host-based assets and the network-based assets. For example, multi-level of antivirus control, preventative tools and intrusion detection solutions. We need to make sure that there are warning elements in place. So virtual private networking is, of course, consistently going to be depended on, but what type of systems are we landing on eventually, and are those systems indeed secure by design? So with that being said, we have to consider a cyber-first culture, right? So it goes beyond just simple guidelines and best practices. And of course, there's some basic needs that need to be addressed. We always talk about keeping our systems up to date, keeping operating systems and patches, for example, as regularly updated as possible. We want to make sure that not only our operating systems, but of course the software that we use on a regular basis is kept up to date. In many cases, these are IT department policies that can automatically be provided to your system, even when you're working remotely. So in order to drive that cyber first mentality, we need to make sure that everyone and everywhere, wherever you're working, is indeed keeping that level of responsibility for cybersecurity. So in this next normal, of course, now more than ever, we need to make sure to focus on cyber awareness and cyber education. It's definitely the first and last protection against cyber attacks. So in many cases, when we talk about what types of controls we can implement to reduce our levels of risk, it always comes down to that people aspect. So performing regular and consistent threat assessments are extremely important to identify the gaps in an ongoing effort, but we also don't want to forget about training of our personnel as well.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. We've seen that companies with more comprehensive cybersecurity preparation were able to adapt to new working environments more easily than others. As best practices, many companies have focused on cybersecurity as a prerequisite for digital transformation. So the further companies are along in their digital transformation, the more agile their operations are today, and they're more able to cope with all these changes. That means that they can more quickly, more securely adapt to the new risk and changing market condition. Not just a global risk, but other fluctuations that we've seen in the past, and we can continue seeing around energy costs, labor costs, governmental regulations, and more. So at the opposite, we also have seen some business leaders reluctant to accept these new technologies, concerned with secure data, cloud, risks from an increase in attacks that take advantage of the situation. So they've adapted in short term. How do they overcome concerns about adapting for the long term? Does accelerating the digital transformation help?
Without a doubt, Nathalie, that's a great question. The short answer is yes. So I say this because in many industries that have already adopted digital transformation, they were actually much better set up to deal with the existing situations that we're dealing with today, especially during when we start seeing a paradigm shift in the way that we traditionally do business that does require additional levels of technical controls. Without a doubt, having a strong digital foundation helps us to prepare for these types of situations. So, for example, if we go into the mining industries, many of these network infrastructures or the sites themselves are already fully unmanned, or at least partially unmanned in some cases. We also see some autonomous wellheads that are either running in the middle of the sea or in empty desert quarters. Certainly many offshore platforms have full autonomous OT infrastructures and even have complete duplicate images of the ones that are running on site or shoreside. So with that being said, from a security perspective, the challenge here is, of course, to make sure that we have a stable and secure communication between the two endpoints. So if we can make with 100% certainty a secure connection to create that remote infrastructure and have the appropriate tools or software on site to run it, then in this case, we can most certainly reduce the necessity for more and more manned sites. The remote location, of course, in this case becomes an extension of the central infrastructure as opposed to just being considered as a remote facility. So cloud infrastructure, of course, is really important to get this off the ground, regardless of whether it's an on-prem private cloud or one of the major cloud services providers. We have to make sure that we build these elements of redundancy in place, and that becomes absolutely critical to our operation. When we talk about these differentiating and foundational factors of OT systems, we also want to take into consideration the design element here. So if they're not necessarily designed to run fully autonomously, then of course we have to build that into your traditional functionality. And of course, when we talk about the traditional functionality, we start asking, well, what happens if we lose connectivity? What happens if we lose communication? And the reality is, if the solutions themselves are built to withstand autonomous operation and to utilize your traditional autonomous operation software and tools, then even if that communication is lost from the on-site facility or the central facility, the OT system itself won't be impacted at all because of those built-in redundancies. So let's be clear, this approach isn't going to work for every operation. We've noted, of course, up front that despite the levels of automation, there will still be a requirement for people to control these processes. For example, even if we had a fully autonomous network infrastructure up in place, we will still have to send maintenance crews to make sure that these sites are running optimally and to ensure operational efficiency. The perceived risks, of course, of remote connectivity today are substantially lower because of the technologies available. They actually are an asset to everyone, and we can use them not only to improve the business continuity, but also to operate successfully in this next normal.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jay, for your insights, and thank you, everyone, for watching today our presentation. We have covered the importance of a clear and comprehensive cybersecurity posture to help companies better handle situations like the COVID-19 situation, which also allowed us to be more flexible and better respond to future business risks in the new way of working and running operations. These new ways of working can put more strain on existing system and cloud, increase cybersecurity risk if you are not prepared. So the good news is that there are solutions available that can meet your company's specific needs. And the first step can be a secure remote access application, but companies also need to review their policies, procedures, and learn from industry best practices. We are all learning and applying those lessons to our businesses, and we will continue to support our customers in meeting these challenges of the next normal. So thank you, Jay. Where can people get more information about these and other cybersecurity topics?
Thank you, Nathalie. It's my pleasure. I hope we've been able to provide some useful information for everyone. Our team of security experts is working around the clock to make sure that our customers, we're helping our customers prioritize and implement the right solutions, not only to support their digital transformation, but of course, to also make sure that their cybersecurity needs and their risk mitigation needs are always met. I invite everybody to visit our website, of course, to get some more information about our solutions and services. And of course, I highly encourage you to reach out to our Cybersecurity Virtual Academy, where you can see some webinars, download some of our white papers, and get a lot more useful information about how to mitigate these cybersecurity challenges. You can also contact us directly through the email addresses that are shown on the screen. And again, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope everybody stays safe.